My uncle has been a huge Batman fan ever since he was a kid, and while growing up, he'd babysit me and my sister a lot. A lot of my early gaming experiences came from him. He practically taught me how to play video games from the age of 5 or so, starting with games like LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga, and more importantly to this video, LEGO Batman. LEGO Batman was my first proper exposure to the character. I mean, sure, I knew who Batman was, but I didn't really consume any media involving him until this game came out. And this game, very strangely, just threw you right into the deep end of the Batman mythos. It wasn't like Star Wars, where the only required context was to watch the movies it was adapting. LEGO Batman just took all these iconic characters and threw them into the game and just kind of expected the player to understand who they were. As a kid, I didn't properly understand who these people were. I didn't know what a Riddler was, or why this guy with an umbrella was so important, but that's not to say that I wasn't absolutely enamored with these characters the second I met them. I fell in love with this world almost immediately. I fell in love with its atmosphere, I fell in love with its characters, and I fell in love with the idea of the Batman. It wasn't until probably early 2009, maybe late 2008, where my uncle came to my house to look after us yet again. But this time he had a Smith's catalogue with him. He flipped through the pages and landed on the video game section, and there he pointed it out. Batman Arkham Asylum. And I lost my 5-year-old mind. I'd experienced these characters in LEGO form, sure, but from what he was showing me, this was the adult experience. And as a 5-year-old, that was the coolest thing ever. I remember watching the trailers and not really understanding the concept of a release date. I mean, they're showing me the game, why do I not have it? And it wasn't until my uncle had invited me to his house to stay the night where I was surprised with it. He had it. Batman Arkham Asylum. And this night, however little I remember of it, changed my psyche for the rest of my life. I was hooked. Now, this is the part where most video essays on this game would spend 20 or more minutes explaining the entire plot as if you've never played it before. And I'm sorry if that's what you were expecting, but it's just not really my style. When I say that I love this series, I mean it, and I promised myself that I was simply not allowed to make this video if I half-assed it and didn't have anything unique to add to the conversation. But I do. A common take on Batman Arkham Asylum in recent years is that it's a horror game in a sense. But contrary to what many people will tell you, it's not. It definitely has its moments, don't get me wrong, but to call it a horror game outright wouldn't be entirely accurate. I would describe it as more of a gateway horror game. As someone who played this game as a very young child, I can't remember ever being genuinely scared of it. And this is a topic that has bothered me for a long while, but it wasn't until I rewatched this absolute banger of a video by Assad Anjum, forgive me if I butchered your name by the way, I'm trying my best, that it really dawned on me why I disagree with the horror game take so adamantly. And I think it comes down to Batman himself. A core part of making a horror experience work is making the player feel helpless in some way. For example, in games like Resident Evil, it's done by introducing enemies that the player can only stall but not kill, such as the Tyrant in Resident Evil 2. In games like Five Nights at Freddy's, it's done by removing your ability to move, putting you on the defense. But in Arkham Asylum, it's missing that feeling of helplessness. And for good reason, because Batman is not helpless. If you were playing as any normal guy on the island, wandering these abandoned asylum halls, you'd be a lot more terrified. But Batman himself remains as this pillar of safety in this otherwise hostile environment, quite literally being a pillar of hope for the player. And there are a few key sections of the game where this really comes into play. For example, let's talk about Killer Croc's lair. In any other game, this would be absolutely terrifying. You're walking into the den of a cannibalistic monster that is on record of saying, "I will feast on your bones." Like, man, he's been caught in 4K. But Batman remains unfazed, simply placing a few traps and marching on to do what he has to do without an ounce of fear, because he's Batman. Batman himself represents safety in Arkham. I think the reason I feel so strongly about this is because in recent years the game has come under a lot of fire for its very stoic and, for lack of a better word, emotionless take on Batman. And while I don't think that those criticisms are without merit, I also think the people saying that fail to understand the themes of this game and what purpose Batman serves within his own story. This stoic and calm demeanour is intentional, and it serves the contrast with the otherwise chaotic environment that he's found himself in. This is just one really busy night for the Caped Crusader, and as the game goes on, he very obviously is just getting more and more pissed off at Joker than anything. And this isn't to say that Batman doesn't have doubts. He does. He even says so to Gordon just before you face Bane, but he still marches forward regardless, because that's just who he is. He is bravery in the face of adversity. And when it comes to facing down evil, no one can say it better than the Dark Knight himself.
Ready for the next round?
Always.
What?
I'll never let you win. Never.
But let's take a minute and talk about Arkham Batman in a bit more detail, because I think there's quite a bit to be said. Particularly if we put a bit of a lens on the most underrated game in the franchise, Arkham Origins. Arkham Origins adds context to this story, showing us a younger, angrier Batman in his first year, blah blah blah, you've heard it all before. What I'm interested in is how Arkham Origins serves Arkham Asylum. And I don't think it'd be a hot take to say that Arkham Origins is a much busier game than Asylum. And while the stakes in Origins are much smaller, with Joker's plans being a lot more tame in comparison for what he had planned in Asylum, the personal stakes in regards to Batman are much higher, with his whole identity being on the line. The reason I'm mentioning all this is to show that Arkham Asylum is not Batman's most stressful night up to this point. Origins adds this context, and now in retrospect, we can play Asylum and understand why Batman seems to be so stoic. He's done this all before, and regardless if he falters a bit, he has the will to keep pushing. And even when he falters, he shakes it right off and gets back to work. Hell, he thought Gordon was dead for a few minutes while fighting Scarecrow, and that didn't stop him. And just while we're on the topic, Scarecrow.
Don't do it, Crane.
Where do I even begin? You all know the iconic scene where Scarecrow crashes the game in his last appearance, but important context from my experience while playing the game is that I didn't play it from the beginning. My uncle had already started it and was nearly at the end when I came over, so my first ever introduction to Scarecrow outside of LEGO Batman was this scene. My uncle wasn't convinced for a second that the game had actually crashed. He just said, "Scarecrow." And my little mind was absolutely blown. I watched as the fake out cutscene played, as Joker shot Batman, and as Batman failed, quote unquote. And it's the one time I can genuinely remember being a bit freaked out while playing this game. And then there he was, in all of his glory, the best Batman villain, Scarecrow. And he has been talked about to death by this point, let's not pretend he hasn't. And while I have plenty to say about how I think they butchered his character after this game, in a vacuum, this is the perfect representation of the Scarecrow. He goes against everything I've said up to this point about Batman, because he's the one character who actually gets Batman to crack a bit, aside from Joker himself. The Scarecrow sections both contradict and support the point I've been trying to make so far. What do I mean by that? I've been trying to explain that Batman is able to overcome all adversity and doesn't break down his calm demeanour, aside from a few sections in the game such as towards the end against Joker. But Scarecrow does what Joker spends the entire game trying to do. He makes Batman crack. In his first appearance, he makes Batman think that he's failed to save a dear friend of his. And in each subsequent appearance, he doubles down, making Batman relive the day his parents died. But what really interests me is how Scarecrow, though temporarily, removes the safety net and comfort that Batman brings to the player. When Scarecrow crashes the game, we are ripped from the safety of the cowl and placed into the view of the enemy. We are forced to play the game through the villain's lens. It was this scene that made me realise why Arkham Asylum was not a proper horror experience. The game didn't genuinely frighten me until Batman was ripped from me. The reason Scarecrow is remembered so fondly is because he's a rare breed of villain who doesn't only attack the player character, but attacks the player directly. And what happens when we give control back to Batman? He does what he always does. He marches forward. He embodies the symbol of hope that he has been from the beginning, and quite literally shines a pillar of light upon evil to ward it away. The amount of symbolism in the Scarecrow sections in particular that I never understood as a kid is baffling to me. They really cooked here. But moving on, people always speak about how Asylum has the best atmosphere in the series, and while I agree, it does bother me to an extent that no one goes into more detail as to why that is. The usual points made are that the asylum is dark and dreary and is just overall a very creepy place, and yeah, that's true, but it was never a very satisfying answer to me. So when I replayed the game in preparation for this video, I tried to really take note of what made the game feel so creepy. And it wasn't until I'd finished the game and had started collecting all the remaining Riddler secrets that I really figured out what that was. This asylum doesn't just feel like it's been lived in before. It feels like it's still being lived in. Even when I was wandering the empty halls, it always felt like something else was there. I could never quite figure out why that was as a kid, but now I think I get it. And I think it's because, and stay with me here, it's because of the Riddler. And I'm not just talking about how every once in a while he'll start laughing over the mic like we're in an Xbox 360 party, even though that has genuinely scared the shit clean out of me several times. I'm more so talking about how many secrets he's put throughout the game. When you end up in a dark, dreary hallway filled with cobwebs that has clearly not been touched in years and suddenly you see a Riddler trophy, it reminds you that someone else could always be lurking around the corner. Because if Riddler was able to get up there, surely somebody else could too. I remember being a kid and asking my uncle how all these trophies ended up there, and he just said Riddler put them there. For some reason that really put me on edge because I could just imagine catching a glimpse of maybe the Riddler himself around a corner or something. Now of course as I've gotten older I've realised that if I did see the Riddler he better start running because Batman would slap the shit clean out of him and leave him with about 3 teeth left in his head, but that's not the point.
What?
The riddles themselves also add to this feeling. For example, coming across Two-Face's cell and then remembering that Two-Face was canonically in this building when the game began. That feeling of being watched never really goes away, even when you've beaten every thug in the asylum and recaptured every villain. And it certainly doesn't help when one of the 3 villains you've captured gets an end credits scene showing that they'll return, particularly when it's Scarecrow, though you feel his presence much more in the sequel. But all it ever took when I was a bit unnerved playing this game as a kid was to remember who I was playing as. I wasn't some helpless kid when I was playing this game. I couldn't afford to be scared. I was Batman, and I had to keep pushing forward. Maybe this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. At the end of the day, it's just something I'm very passionate about. But I truly love this series, and I think I'd like to make another video or 2 on it later down the line. And while a lot of people have started to look at this series in a more critical lens over the last few years with their retrospectives and professional critiques, I thought it privy just to cut this game a little break that I know it deserves, because there's nothing quite like it, and I don't think there ever will be. The other Arkham games are fantastic, don't get me wrong, but this one is just really lightning in a bottle for me and I love it dearly. But anywho, hi, yeah, I'm back. Long story short, I had to take a bit of a break because I had to move jobs and I'm doing a lot more hours now. I even considered just shelving the whole idea of doing YouTube for a bit, but I really couldn't stay away. I really enjoy making these little videos, and for the first time since I started, I'm actually seeing a bit of success, so if you enjoyed it, please give me a like and subscribe so I can keep being motivated to do this more often. Please and thanks, I love you, bye!